Hey guys, welcome to Dogforge. My name's Paul, and welcome back to our Tasha's Cauldron of Everything series. Do you want more Tasha's and D&D content? Then hit that subscribe button and notification bell to get the latest on 5e. But now it's time to throw on your bathrobe. You know the one I'm talking about. As today we're taking a look at the Jedi, Psi Warrior. It's totally the Psi Warrior. So this is a fighter subclass, and as with all fighter subclasses, we're going to get this at 3rd level. So, as you can see, straight off the bat, we have some pretty cool art, and this is the first of the 2 Psionic subclasses we're going to be addressing in Tasha's. For those uninitiated, Psionics is essentially just the power of the mind. All of your traditional ESP, telepathy, telekinetic ability tropes, that's where you're going to find them in D&D, as well as a lot of, more traditionally in D&D, you're also going to get a lot more body modification, although we don't really get that within these subclasses. So this is, I made that joke in the opening for a very good reason, that this is basically what you want to play if you want to model yourself after a Jedi. You're missing only the little bit of Jedi mind trick, but you have the enhanced jumping, you have force push and pull, and you have that little bit of extra oomph to your strikes, like the Force is guiding you. So, starting off at 3rd level, we're going to get our Reservoir of Psionic Power. Now, the Psionic subclasses in Tasha's use an alternate dice mechanic. So, this is Psionic Energy Dice, and this is going to be a pool of dice that grows with you over time that fuels your abilities. This is the same mechanic for both the Soul Knife Rogue and the Psi Warrior Fighter. So, you're going to have a number of these dice, which are d6s to begin with, equal to twice your proficiency bonus. So once you get this ability at 3rd level, you're going to have 4 of these dice, and they recharge at a long rest. When you hit 5th level, that's going to increase by 2, as it will every time you get a proficiency bonus improvement. However, once per short rest, you can also spend a bonus action in order to get one of those dice back to give you a bit of longevity. Now, you do not necessarily need these dice to fuel every ability, as we'll come to see. Sometimes you get a free use, and in the case of the Rogue subclass, sometimes you only expend the dice if you fail. Now, the dice do also improve at the proficiency levels as well. So at 5th, it's going to get a bump from a D6 to a D8, and at 11th level, it's going to go to a D10, and 17th to a D12. Now, since this is a long rest mechanic, although you do have that short rest bump for 1 dice, it is worth bearing in mind that for the Psi Warrior, you're going to need to be a bit more conservative than if you were playing something like a Battlemaster, especially since there's no clear way to increase your pool size outside of the proficiency bonus within the class. So, one thing to bear in mind as well as we go into these initial abilities is that the Psi Warrior is an intelligence secondary subclass, although unlike the Eldritch Knight, it is far more dependent on intelligence to be effective. So this is definitely one of the more mad or multi-attribute dependent fighter subclasses we have. So the first of the abilities we get at 3rd level is going to be Protective Field. So when you or another creature within 30 feet of you, and that is the standard range for most of these abilities, takes damage, you can use your reaction to spend 1 of your psychic die and reduce the damage taken by the number you roll on that die, plus your intelligence modifier, as you create a momentary shield of telekinetic force. And the Psi Warrior is entirely built around this concept of using telekinesis in various ways. Next up, Psionic Strike. This is essentially a smite-like option, and it's very reminiscent of what we saw in the Way of Mercy Monk, in that you're going to get a die and modifier. So once on each of your turns, it is limited, just like the Monk was. When you hit a target within 30 feet of you with a weapon and deal damage to it, so it has to be a weapon, it cannot be an unarmed strike or a spell, you can expend 1 of your die and deal force damage to it equal to the amount you roll plus your intelligence modifier. So the higher your intelligence modifier, the higher your ceiling and the higher your low and average damage will be for this ability. Now again, as your pool is so limited, you're not going to be breaking this out all of the time, but this is a nice burst of damage, and force is one of the nicer damage types as it's the least resisted and least immune in the game. And finally, at 3rd level, we're going to get telekinetic movement. You can move one object or a creature with your mind. As an action, you can target one loose object that is large or smaller, or one willing creature other than yourself. If you can see the target and is within 30 feet of you, you can move it up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space you can see. Now, this is where the Jedi definitely comes in. Alternatively, if it is a tiny object, like a lightsaber hilt, you can move it to or from your hand. Either way, you can move the target horizontally, vertically, or both. Once you take this action, you can't do so again until you finish a short or long rest, unless you burn a die to do it. So here we're getting the first of our kind of... I'm going to reference Star Wars a lot. If you don't like Star Wars, I'm sorry, it's the most apt comparison. This is our first force push and pull ability, and it's nice in that you get it free once per any rest, short or long, but you do have the option of burning Psi dice, which I'm going to use as shorthand for Psionic energy dice, in order to do it more. So that's a nice feature. Next up at level 7, and this is a little bit of a departure. Normally at 7th level for fighters we're going to get roleplay or not strictly mechanically beneficial things in combat, and this is a little different as the Psi Warrior departs from this. So first off, we're going to get Psi Powered Leap. As a bonus action, you can propel your body with your mind. So this is going to give you a flying speed equal to twice your walking speed until the end of the current turn. Once you use this as a bonus action, you can't do so again until you finish a short or long rest, until you spend an energy die to do it again otherwise. So again, we're getting this free once per short rest, so this is going to be one of the fighters where you're going to get to do a lot more versatile things without necessarily infringing on your effectiveness strictly in combat. Although if you want to do those things more often, you do have the option of burning your resource to do them. Next up, telekinetic thrust. When you deal damage to a target with your psionic strike, you can force the target to make a saving throw against your DC equal to 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your int modifier. If the save fails, you can knock the target prone or move it 10 feet in any direction horizontally. So they're being very clear with the wording in this book that you can't send them flying upwards, potentially causing fall damage or something that's similar. And this is where I was talking about, it's a very big departure. So in comparison, the Battlemaster is probably our nearest cousin to this subclass, as it also uses a dice pool mechanic. But at 7th level, they get Know Your Enemy, which is just, out of combat, you spend some time evaluating the enemy and you get to learn some information about them. This Psi Powered Leap definitely can be an out of combat utility, but telekinetic thrust is strictly an enhancement to their combat. That is a departure from what we've seen, and that's something that kind of bumps the overall power level of this fighter. And it's one of the things that ends up making this fighter, a really solid option overall. Moving on to 10th level, we're going to get Guarded Mind. And this is basically your mastery of psionics is giving you resistance to psychic damage. And if you start your turn charmed or frightened, you can burn a psionic energy dice to end every effect of yourself, subjecting you to those conditions. That can be nice, for instance, if you're fighting a dragon and you've been subject to their draconic fear effect. And there's actually quite a lot of monsters that impose charmed or frightened on you. So that's overall really nice, although it is just for yourself. Level 15, we're going to get a Bulwark of Force. So you can shield yourself and others with telekinetic force. As a bonus action, you can choose creatures which can include you, that you can see within 30 feet, up to a number of creatures equal to your intelligence modifier. Each of those chosen creatures is protected by half cover for 1 minute or until you're incapacitated. Once you take this bonus action, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest, or unless you expend a psionic energy dice. So one thing to keep in mind, is the other abilities we've seen thus far that are recharge based, they have allowed you to recharge it on a short rest. This is just a long rest recharge unless you burn a die to do it more. This is pretty good, and it's one of our first in a while support features. At 3rd level we did get that damage reduction ability, that barrier. So this is a nice addition to that, and it kind of makes it feel like this fighter is kind of well-rounded in a lot of ways. The damage is decent, the utility is kind of decent, and the protection of yourself and others, again, is kind of decent. But bear in mind that Psi energy pool is going to get stretched real thin if you're trying to do all of these things. Next up, and the last thing for our Psi Warrior, is Telekinetic Master. So you can cast the telekinesis spell requiring no components. Your spellcasting ability is intelligence, and on each of your turns whilst you're concentrating on it, including the turn that you cast it, you can also make one attack with a weapon as a bonus action. Once you cast a spell like this, you can't do so until you finish a long rest, unless you spend a psionic energy die to cast it again. That's quite a lot of mileage out of a single die to be able to cast telekinesis. So I'll pop that on screen for you to read if you'd like. So a 5th level spell for a single dice, that's very good value, and the fact that whilst you're concentrating on this you can also throw out there a bonus action attack, which doesn't have to be limited to, you know, a single sword swipe. You can use heavy weapons, you could use ranged weapons, so it's very versatile in accommodating different types of play. So this has been the Psi Warrior, and to be honest, I like it. I was a little hesitant about the psionic subclasses because I'm a fan and supporter of the Mystic. There's a little part of me that's holding out for it. But I'm pretty happy with this as a psionic option in a subclass, and as you'll find out when we get to it, I also quite like the Soul Knife. But what I think doesn't really matter here. What matters is what you think. So, what do you think about the Psi Warrior? Since I've referred to it so many times, who is your favourite Jedi? Tell us in the comment section down below, and hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. Whilst you're there, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and that notification bell for more D&D and Tasha's content. My name's Paul, and I'll see you next time at the Forge.